It is time that I finally take my advice and stop allowing perfectionism to hold me back. Welcome back to Disclaimers Aside 2.0. This podcast episode is actually live on my YouTube channel. It's been a minute, so let's get into it. Let's get into Disclaimers Aside 2.0 and what that's going to look like. If you guys have never heard of Disclaimers Aside and you're watching on YouTube, Disclaimers Aside was a podcast that I started in 2022. I started it in college. I had a lot of time on my hands, and it really just was a space where I could kind of talk about anything that I wanted in a very unfiltered, unstructured way. I have always been very much a long-form content girly, and something about podcasting really just allowed me to be a little bit more unfiltered. It was also a really cool space to be able to talk about certain topics that I didn't necessarily felt like belonged on YouTube in more in depth. It was a space where I could really share a lot more of my reflections and my learnings, and every once in a while I would have guests on for different episodes. I think these past few years it has been a little bit difficult to stay consistent with Disclaimers Aside because I really wanted the podcast to be a very intentional space and to record episodes really from a place of genuine, authentic creativity. It was really hard to keep up with it during times where I felt creatively burnt out. And the thing about being a creative and posting on different platforms online is a lot of online platforms really like consistency. I mean, even as a viewer, I really like to watch and follow people that are somewhat consistent. It's always nice when a creator is consistent, but from the creator end of things, it's not always the most sustainable to be super consistent, especially on platforms like podcasting where you can get really vulnerable and you're sharing just a lot about your life and your inner reflections. I always, though, really loved Disclaimers Aside for the space that it was, because I feel like it was a space where I was able to have such introspective conversations. I got to a point last year where I decided I was only going to really record episodes when I had a good idea or I felt like I had something on my mind that I wanted to say. And that kind of just led me to taking an unintentional, 4-month break. I haven't recorded an episode for Disclaimers Aside since last May. The last episode that I recorded was an advice session with my mom. Love that episode. It was honestly one of my favorite episodes, and I wasn't really intending to record until I really felt like I was in a place where I was feeling creatively fulfilled again. Taking that time off, I think, was really important because I think as a creative, what fuels you, what fulfills you, what inspires you is the world around you. And sometimes you really do just need space to experience the world around you, to read books, to watch movies, go on quiet walks, read poetry, listen to music. You really need time to just experience the world around you, to have ideas and to show up in yourself as a creative. And so I feel like this time, this summer, going back home to Mauritania and just taking a break in general from my daily life has just recharged me a little bit. And I feel like recently I've been feeling a bit more creatively inspired and the desire to get back into podcasting, but also to bring a lot of the conversations that I had on Disclaimers Aside also to YouTube. I really enjoy watching podcasts on YouTube. When I was deciding how I wanted to bring back Disclaimers Aside and how Disclaimers Aside 2.0 would work, I decided, why not give the girls everything they want? Why not post these podcast episodes as I have been on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for those of you guys who like to listen to podcasts on your walks or on your long drives, on your commutes, and then also bring these conversations to YouTube so they can reach a larger audience, because I know some people aren't really podcast people. They like a more visual experience. And so Disclaimers Aside is becoming a visual podcast. It's something I've actually been wanting to do for a while, even before I started to become a little bit creatively burnt out with the podcast. It was something that I was kind of wanting to do, but a lot of what was holding me back was perfectionism. Honestly, just seeing all of these visual podcasts that I watch, like really successful visual podcasts where they have a really nice studio and a really nice setup, and I don't have that. I mean, my room is cute, but it's not a podcast studio. And I think sometimes when we see a specific model of how things are always done, we feel like we need to fit the mold of that model to do something. So I put off for a long time the decision of how to move forward with Disclaimers Aside. And then recently I feel like I've just been thinking a lot about how perfectionism and overthinking can hold me back in a lot of aspects of my life. This was definitely an area where that was the case. These are going to be recorded, as I mentioned, and posted to Spotify and Apple Podcasts as they normally have been. And they're also going to be on YouTube if you like more of a visual experience. I don't necessarily have the most perfect setup, but we're not going to let perfectionism hold us back. I also just debated doing this and relaunching Disclaimers Aside in the new year. I think this is a moment where we can all learn from the fact that you don't have to wait for the new year to start something new. In fact, this is the perfect time to start something new because it gives you the time to really get into the groove and the habit of it before the new year starts. So in terms of the structure of Disclaimers Aside and how things, I guess, are going to change, before Disclaimers Aside was a bi-weekly podcast, so I would post episodes every other week. That is a little bit unsustainable for me, unfortunately. So instead, we're just going to commit to one episode a month, aiming for towards the end of the month. This is October's episode. It's just coming a little bit late. I'm thinking one episode a month. I'm really excited. I have some interesting topics that I'm already excited to delve into and talk about and share with you guys. But if there are any topics that you guys want me to talk about or delve into, comment them down below. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can find the comment section at youtube.com/aissata. I love hearing your guys' feedback. I love hearing what you guys want to hear from me. And so I'd love to hear your feedback on what are some topics you guys want to hear. If you're someone who's never listened to Disclaimers Aside, the way I would describe it is kind of a little bit of a diary because it's a lot of my reflections and my thoughts. I try to talk about the things that I've been learning in my life, the realizations that I've been having. Sometimes I'll talk about things that are happening in the world. Sometimes I'll bring in theory a little bit. It's just kind of a little bit of everything. And it really is just kind of a space where it's kind of unfiltered. That's where the name Disclaimers Aside came from, was I really wanted to have raw, honest, unfiltered conversations. And I think at this point in social media and just like the digital world, the whole conversation about authenticity is something that is really, really interesting to see because so much of what is on social media is just very curated, whether or not it's authentic. I think there's just like a lot online that's curated, but what Disclaimers Aside was kind of intended to be was just kind of a space where we can just have as unfiltered, raw conversations as possible without the pretense of like trying to be politically correct. Because if there's one thing for sure, I am not politically correct. I try my best to be, but I am definitely not politically correct, and I'm definitely not the most well-informed. Having said that, these episodes are most likely going to be a little bit shorter than my episodes before. I think before I used to aim for about an hour long per podcast episode. I think with this series, I'm trying to aim for more like 30-minute episodes because I think that's another one of the things that held me back was just the sheer pressure of talking for so long. I love talking. I'm a certified yapper and I enjoy it, but it's really difficult to talk about one subject sometimes in depth for that long by yourself and for it to not get boring. One thing I don't like is redundancy. I like things to be as efficient as possible. I don't like to repeat myself. And so it's really difficult sometimes to talk about topics that I found really interesting for such a long period of time. All of our attention spans are getting super short these days. I know people are not sitting here listening to an episode for that long. The direction that I want Disclaimers Aside 2.0 to go into is more shorter, curated episodes, so around like 30-minute episodes with more tailored conversations. There is a Disclaimers Aside podcast Instagram. You guys can go follow it. It's just a community, catch-all community space. I do want to end off with a comment that I recently got on a short that I posted. Someone said, "Love the way you think and how you articulate. Can you give me any tips? I want to speak more eloquently," which, thank you so much. That is honestly so kind. And being able to speak, being able to communicate is such an important skill. And alhamdulillah, one of the blessings that has come with this, with content creation, is that it really has forced me to practice my public speaking skills. It's really forced me to think carefully about my words. It really gets me in the practice of communicating ideas in the most effective and captivating way, which is really helpful because I do have the long-term goal of becoming an attorney and inshallah going to law school. And so in that sense, I think it's good because I'm building applicable skills for my future professional goals. One thing I will say when it comes to trying to speak more eloquently and being able to express your ideas in more of a coherent way is I think a lot of us just need to slow way down. I think a lot of the times we feel the need to speak fast, to get out our ideas really quickly. A lot of the times it causes us to jumble up our words, to not really fully encapsulate the idea that we're trying to come across. Slow down. It's okay if you're talking and you're pausing in between to think. That's something that I feel like I felt very insecure in myself, is that I'm the type of person where I think as I'm talking. I don't really, okay, this is going to sound really bad, but I don't really think before I speak. I kind of think as I'm speaking. And so sometimes that leads to natural pauses in me talking. The thing is, it doesn't really come across online because when I'm editing for the user experience, I cut out a lot of the pauses in between so that it's not a horrible experience to listen or watch. But in general, I speak pretty slowly, and that will allow you to kind of articulate yourself in the way that you really want. Think about your words carefully. And don't be afraid to speak slowly. You don't have to get your ideas out there really fast. Also, too, if you really want to get good at speaking and just incorporating higher vocabulary into your daily life, you need to read more. I cannot tell you how important reading is to building your vocabulary. I would say I have a fairly decent vocabulary, and it really just has come from the fact that I'm pretty well read. I was a political science major in my undergrad, and so I pick up on a few words here and there. The only way you're going to really build your vocabulary is by reading, and reading high quality material. I love me a fiction book. I love me a fun romance book, but if you really want to build your vocabulary, you need to read books that are just a little bit more substantive. And the last thing I will say is that if you want to build a very introspective perspective on the world, you have to create space in your life for introspection. So what that really means is making sure that you're building quiet time into your life, making sure that you're journaling or just being reflective about your life in whatever format kind of works for you. For me, I really do like journaling. It's been hard to keep up with recently, but in general, I'm always thinking. And while I love constantly having a podcast or an audiobook playing in the background, I try and make space and time in my day where it's just silent, where I'm not really listening to anything, where I can just, think. You don't need to be listening to a podcast while you're showering. Take that long shower and really just kind of ruminate and reflect on your life, because if you don't, there will just be all vibes, no thoughts. I hope that helps. In general, I'm really excited for Disclaimers Aside 2.0. I honestly felt really guilty this weekend when I did a Q&A over on my Instagram and got a couple people asking about the podcast and when it was going to be back. I just needed the time away, I feel like, to really reorient myself and figure out how I wanted to move forward with Disclaimers Aside. But it is, an important space to me and something that I'm excited to also just kind of integrate it a little bit more with my content here on YouTube. If you guys are not already, I would love if you guys could subscribe. And with that, I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.